The diplomatic shuttle had barely touched down on the crystalline landing pad of Station Kareth 9 when the alarms began to wail. Sarah stepped out into the humid atmosphere, her boots clicking against the transparent floor that revealed the swirling gas giant below. She carried nothing but a small leather satchel, and the kind of calm expression that came from facing down worse things than whatever awaited her here. The Vexri delegation stood at attention, their chitinous plates gleaming under the station's amber lights. Behind them, partially hidden by ceremonial pillars, were the cubs. Sarah had read the briefing during her 3-week journey. The Vexri were apex predators on their homeworld, their young trained from hatching to hunt to fight to dominate. This meeting was meant to introduce humanity to the next generation of Vexri leadership. What the briefing hadn't mentioned was how adorable they would be. Ambassador Kreltok stepped forward, his mandibles clicking in the formal greeting pattern. "Human Sarah, we welcome you to witness the unveiling of our future warriors. They will demonstrate their prowess, their ferocity, their—" A small chirping sound interrupted him. One of the cubs had broken formation. It was no larger than a terrier, covered in midnight blue scales that caught the light like oil on water. Its eyes were enormous and golden, its tiny claws clicking nervously on the floor as it approached Sarah with what was clearly meant to be a threatening posture. "Jar!" Kreltok's voice carried a note of panic. "Return to position immediately." But Jar had committed. The cub took another step forward, then another, until it stood directly in front of Sarah. It reared up on its hind legs, spreading the small frills around its neck, and opened its mouth to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth that gleamed like diamonds. "Rrrr." The sound was somewhere between a kitten's hiss and a squeaky toy. The adult Vexri froze in horror. This was their most promising youngling, the offspring of their greatest warrior, and it had just threatened a diplomat from a species they barely understood. A species that had somehow inexplicably survived everything the galaxy had thrown at them. A species that had looked at the vacuum of space and decided to live there anyway. Sarah tilted her head, studying the tiny predator. Jar's frills quivered slightly. His tail, which had been lashing with what he clearly believed was terrifying intensity, began to slow. "Well," Sarah said softly, crouching down to Jar's level. "Hello there, little one." She reached into her satchel, every adult Vexri tensed. Kreltok's hand moved toward the ceremonial blade at his hip. Were humans armed? Was this tiny creature about to pay the price for his boldness with his life? The galaxy had whispered stories about humans, how they had conquered worlds, how they never surrendered, how they turned their own fragile bodies into weapons when necessary. Sarah's hand emerged from the satchel holding a small, round object wrapped in brown paper. "I brought these from Earth," she said, carefully unwrapping it. "My grandmother's recipe. Oat and honey biscuits." She broke off a piece and held it out to Jar. The cub sniffed suspiciously. His nostrils flared, processing scents his species had never encountered. Sweet, grainy, warm. Nothing in his genetic memory said danger, but nothing said food either. He looked back at the adults, his frills flattening with uncertainty. "It's okay," Sarah murmured. "You were very brave showing me your teeth like that. Very fierce. I bet you're going to be a great warrior someday." Jar's tongue flicked out, barely touching the biscuit, then again more boldly. Finally, he snatched it from her hand and began to chew, his eyes widening with surprise. Behind him, the other cubs had broken formation entirely. They crept forward, drawn by curiosity and the strange, sweet smell. There were 5 of them in total, each trying to maintain their predatory dignity while clearly fascinated by the human who had made their leader sit down and eat from her hand. Sarah pulled out more biscuits. "There's plenty for everyone." One by one they approached. One by one they sat. Kreltok watched in stunned silence as the human, this small, soft creature with no natural armor, no claws, no venom, reduced their most promising warriors to a circle of contented cubs munching on alien treats. Jar had even rolled onto his back, his tail thumping against the floor in a display that was decidedly unpredatory. "I don't understand," Kreltok finally said. "They have trained for this moment since hatching. They know nothing but the hunt, the fight. How did you—" Sarah stood brushing crumbs from her pants. "Ambassador, may I ask you something? How old are they?" 4 stellar cycles. Nearly ready for their first real hunt. 4 years old. Sarah smiled. "On Earth we have a saying, you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar. These aren't warriors yet, Ambassador." They're children. Brave children, to be sure, but children nonetheless. She turned to face him fully, and for the first time, Kreltok saw something in her eyes that made his scales prickle with instinctive recognition. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't even challenge. It was something far more unsettling. Understanding. Every species in the galaxy seems to think humans are dangerous because we're aggressive, Sarah continued. But that's not quite right. We're dangerous because we understand that aggression isn't the only strength. We've learned to nurture, to teach, to turn enemies into friends with patience and kindness. Do you know how many species we've fought in our history? And do you know how many of them we've also befriended? Jar chirped happily, rolling back over and looking up at Sarah with adoring eyes. All of them, Ambassador. Every single one. Kreltok looked at his cubs sitting calmly around the human like she was their clutch mother. He thought about the reports he'd read, the warnings he'd received about human unpredictability, their strange emotional bonds, their tendency to adopt anything that moved. Perhaps, he said slowly, we have much to learn from each other. Sarah smiled and offered him a biscuit. Perhaps we do. And the ambassador of the Vexry, apex predator of his world, found himself sitting down as well.